Hi, Tyson. Nice to see you.
Uh, Thanks, Helen.
Welcome to the Modern Masculine Summit, everybody. This is Tyson Adams. Tyson is talking to me from San Diego in America, and he's the founder of Thrive. Thrive is a business that was created by Tyson to coach men who have had issues with addiction and primarily pornography addiction. So, an incredible thing that you're doing, Tyson, and such an important conversation that this one is today. I'm just so thrilled that you're here to be so candid and so courageous in talking about your own experiences. So, welcome and yeah, tell us some more about your business and how you got to this point.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm so excited to be here. Um, yeah, so the journey with pornography has been an interesting one. How do I say this? I can honestly and mm, courageously say that yeah, two decades of pretty much compulsive pornography use. And so that's sort of the trajectory from where I was at when I was, first exposed at, around 9 years old, all the way until 3 years ago when I quit and outgrew it for good. And so now I've been working with men for a couple of years to take control of their own sexuality and see what life is like with a short pause and see if that serves them. So yeah, that's kind of that's the fast story. Now we'll get into the juicy parts.
Yeah. So tell us about what does this look like, the pornography equation at the moment? Because obviously, we're in a situation where as well, this is going to be so blown up in the fact that we're in isolation, and so there's a difficulty of people actually being distracted in other ways. So what's happening out there at the moment?
Yeah, with COVID, we're up about 16% in viewership across the world, which is judged by Pornhub, which is the largest pornography site. They publish their statistics, and we can certainly go into that more and kind of talk about the whole global pornography through the lens of just one site, which is the largest, and then there's obviously hundreds, thousands of other ones that are not accounted for. But yeah, there's a relationship between anxiety and insomnia and the usage of porn. So the more anxious we become, the more sleepless we become, the more that we turn to pornography in these times. And unfortunately, what I've known in myself, but also when I work with my clients, the more you go to it, the more anxiety it actually creates. So it's kind of a self-revolving door. It just creates more of that which you're trying to get away from. And so then it becomes this cycle that you get looped in. And then the part that really is, how do I say this? The part that's really tricky with it is that men think that they're horny, but really they're eroticizing their actual anxiety. And so they're confusing being aroused with their anxiousness. And so then they end up, spending large amounts of time behind browsers and satisfying themselves in that way. So yeah, it's an interesting time we're living in with high-speed internet all over the world.
Yeah. And so it's interesting, isn't it, that there's so many reasons in people's lives why they would turn to that, but also there's such shame attached to it, isn't it? So it's this secret addiction, which is why I think it's not really talked about. Nobody wants to know that it's really happening. So what's that like, the secrecy side of it?
Yeah, so there's two parts to that. There's one that is not in the secret where men just joke around about it, like it's nonchalant, kind of no big deal. And then there's the actuality of doing the act, which is always, usually, not always, but it's primarily in secrecy. So yeah, there's different levels of shame, and depending upon where a man's at in his shame story, it will relate to both the types of pornography that he would watch, but also um, the the things that he would or wouldn't be attracted to in terms of what he finds arousing. So his level of shame will also be a part of what he finds arousing with the type of porn. So what I mean by that is if you're looking at let's just say, men who are addicted to pornography, where let me give a backstory for this. I have a friend in Seattle who's a pornography researcher. He's a PhD, and so he tracked 1,300 people over the course, mainly men, but 1,300 people over the course of about a year to figure out what is the correlation between the type of pornography that you consume and what is your life story. And what he found with certain genres is it's connected directly into the story. So for example, pornography that is related to the male having dominance over the female, and the females being younger and or, let's say, subservient in class or in race or in ethnic background. Often there was a very abusive, domineering father, and so there's a very powerless boy, and so the type of arousal that he finds erotic, or what he finds erotic, would be more geared towards watching those types of porn where it would be a younger woman. Whereas on sort of the opposite side of the spectrum, when it comes to men that have a situation where they're attracted to, let's say, kind of the opposite spectrum, more like a mother type role, or sort of a teacher kind of experience where the woman's where he's attracted to that, that's usually a different story. The story is more of a father that confided in him, a lot of potential enmeshment with mother, and deep layers of shame. And so it depends upon the storyline of how it's going to show up in a man's life. And so what I've noticed and what I work with is really in order to address pornography without going back to origin stories, it's very difficult to really work with it, to have a man to see clearly why he finds a particular imagery or a particular type of pornography as attractive.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
That's so interesting, because it's that fantasy, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So they're buying into a fantasy.
Yeah, there's a lack of control or a powerlessness, and then that becomes arousing, and then that ends up becoming not only the type of pornography that you watch, but also the type of partners that you attract as well. And so there's different storylines with different ways that we would cope with this. But going back to your secrecy and the shame around it, the shame is it's both collective, but it's also individual. So it's passed on generational in families, but then also the collective of men as a whole. And this is really the first wave that we're getting in the last, I would say, maybe 2 years, where men are actually showing up, standing up and saying, hey, there's a different way. This is actually something that doesn't have to control your life, and this is a different way of relating to sexuality and even to your partner. So yeah, it's really amazing and beautiful and fun to be a part of this new wave, but obviously dealing with, in most cases, some pretty dark terrain within each individual person.
Yeah, I would imagine that clients would have to be incredibly brave to just all of a sudden one day go, yeah, I think I need help, and then to actually admit it openly.
Yeah.
This is what I'm doing, and I think I've got a problem. And not only that, but explaining them the type of pornography that they're watching.
Yeah, so this book right here, Your Brain on Porn, this guy, his name's Gary Wilson. He's been studying this stuff for years. And so when I reached out to him, I started talking to him about this. And so the main reason why men come to a place of saying, hey, I want to quit porn, or I want to consider it, is, first and foremost, erectile dysfunction. That's the number one. That also, although this isn't necessarily in this particular book, but that also can be premature ejaculation, men really suffering from that. And then the other thing, number two, is difficulty orgasming. It's called orgasmia, but they actually can't orgasm with a partner or even with masturbation. And so the pornography has obviously created a situation where their dopamine in their brain is not functioning properly, and so they actually they can't, and so that they find themselves in a place of fear, and so that's why they're choosing to get some help. Also, number three, loss of attraction to real partners.
Mm.
Men get scared being out in public and seeing a real woman who they would ordinarily be attracted to, or they feel that they should be, but they're not actually aroused by it anymore. And so their brains are actually being rewired to some degree. And then number four is escalation to disturbing tastes and fantasies. That's a strange one. I have worked with men where they start to consume porn, and first it's, when you're young it's PG, and then it goes to X, and then XX, and then all of a sudden they're down a rabbit hole watching something that is so disturbing for them that they find it appalling. They're like, why am I watching this? It doesn't compart with my own sexual orientation. So they're watching something that is outside of what they orient to. And so then they become confused about that. And then they they start to question it. And then they find themselves into these forums and these places where they actually are seeking some guidance around that. And then number five is just getting caught or charged. So men that, have been caught by a partner and then their relationship blows up in their face and they don't really know what to do. So that's why they find themselves there. And then also sort of the more functional things going on with the individual is social anxiety. They have severe social anxiety and they don't know why. They can't get out and be in public or talk to people. And then number seven is brain fog. Number nine, trouble gaining muscle, so testosterone issues. And then that also lessens their drive, their entrepreneurial drive. If they're entrepreneurs or if they're at work, they just have a difficult time waking up, that sort of thing. And then the last one, number nine, is insomnia. They just can't sleep. So those are the main reasons why men find themselves saying, what's going on with me? Maybe I should take a look.
So when I'm going to go back to a few of those points, because so when men are watching certain types of pornography, in their mind then, is there a point where they think this is the kind of sex I should be having?
Oh yeah, there is absolute it's not on the list, but a lot of men that find themselves in either sexual self-mastery courses or courses where they're trying to learn tantra or all of these other practices, they are so goal-oriented, they're so performance-based in their way of relating to sexuality that there's either too quick of orgasm or they can't orgasm, or there's a self-judgment in and around it. Other things such as men, where women will either communicate that to him, or their partner will communicate saying, well, I've had better lovers than you. And so then there's this internal script where a man knows that he's not where his partner has been before. And so then there's this performance that goes into that. And then that often will take you into the porn world to research and to feel like, oh, this is what they need, this is what they want, this is how they like it. And then that backfires on them too, because then they try to replicate those things. And what you see in a movie has production, it has all kinds of weird fantasies and storylines that are interwoven into things, because on the backside of Pornhub, you have SEO and all of the search rankings. And so they know what people are clicking on. And so they're creating porn to take men in particular ways down these rabbit holes. And then that also confuses a man, because then they think that that's really what a woman or their partner wants. And so when they get back into the bedroom, they have a lot of anxiety and a lot of performance failure. Because
I think that's the same for women as well. Women who have seen pornography are like going, oh, well, that's what I'm supposed to do to make my man happy. And then the man walks in going, well, the expectation is that I should be having sex like this. And actually, there's a lot of injury happening and stuff it's not going to pan out like that. It's not actually like a normal, loving, beautiful relationship. There's no kind of connective sexuality in that. What do you think about what pornography does to relationships?
Yeah. So first of all, I think it's always important for me to say this up front because a lot of people think, "Wow, you're building a business and you're working with men to get them to quit porn. You must be anti-porn." And the truth is I'm not anti-porn, but what I am is certainly I'm pro-sex, and my experience, which has been that contrary to popular belief, like outgrowing porn is not sex negative. It's actually sex positive in that by doing so, you're going to have more sex and better sex. And so my experience, I can only speak anecdotally and then the clients that I work with, but what I have noticed is that in my past relationships, when there was that secrecy there, um, it was a situation where when we would fight or we would have blowups or breakups or whatever, and there was these in-between experiences, this was where I was gravitating, and that became a way that I was soothing myself. It became a comfort place. And so I think the thing that the core kind of foundational building block of the work that I do with men is helping them to understand that their penis or ejaculation is not their release valve on their emotional body. So in other words, it's important not to treat your penis as a means to an end, which is effectively saying that this particular organ is not this thing that's separate from you, because in male culture we grow up going like, oh, we name our penises and we say, oh, it has a mind of its own, and we don't really relate to it as our own body. And so the issue with that is that the pornography further enhances, and or not enhances, how do I say this, the pornography actually trains us to treat ourselves in a particular way, whereby which this is the release valve on the unmetabolized and unprocessed emotions that we're feeling. And those emotions can be wide ranging, because it's a very easy way to feel better, but you only feel better for a moment, and then you're back to the same slate that you just started from. Like you get clean slate, boom, but then as soon as you kind of come out of that orgasm stupor, nothing's changed. You're still angry, you're still sad, you're still anxious, you're still scared, you're still sick. Whatever is there is only momentarily escaped. And
Like
so,
any addiction, isn't it?
absolutely.
That's what every addiction, it's just masking whatever's there. And as soon as you finish doing whatever it is that you're addicted to, it's all still there. There's actually no relief at all. But it's so scary to then just feel what's there. And so then, of course, the addiction is to do what you were doing before again, because you don't want to feel like that. How did you break that cycle to actually be with yourself, to to become to outgrow pornography, like you said?
Sure, sure. So, I mean, in my particular situation, my family has a lot of, how do I say this? There's a lot of past trauma, and that trauma has long lineages that's been passed down. And so, in order for me to really work through it, there were conversations that I needed to have with certain family members and even a childhood therapist that I had in order to connect some dots into why I was attracting certain types of women and why I was attracted to certain types of pornography. Once I was able to understand the origins of what I call eroticizing a wound, then I was able to step back and go, oh, okay, I cognitively understand why these things are showing up in my life. And when you can connect those dots to your past, then from there you can begin to work with saying, hey, is this something that I want to continue doing, or is this something that I want to, outgrow? Is it serving me anymore? But in order to do that, there are some skills that you can learn. Breath work is a huge one. I lead men through very deep breath work experiences. In addition to that, some meditations that are really helpful, which challenge a man to sit with his fantasies and sit with his pornographic mindset in isolation, and to allow himself to become aroused, even to get erections, but to watch them rise and watch them fall and watch them rise and watch them fall, with knowing that there's a boundary, which is that I'm not going to I'm not going to take it to the next step. And so there are ways that a man can work with his energy so that he can move it out of the body, because we're so used to taking our hot head, our anger, our all of this headiness of anxiety, and then we push it down into the body, and then we, of course, it exits, but it doesn't really exit. It just gets trapped in that lower. I mean, if you believe in sort of the chakra systems, or if you believe sort of in the pelvic floor region, then it just gets trapped in that space. So when you work with energy and these sort of meditative states of breath work and working through fantasies, you can actually do some exercises by squeezing those, perineal muscles and those Kegel muscles, and actually begin learning new pathways of bringing that energy like up the back of the spine and over the top of the head, and bringing it in through the mouth and actually exhaling it out of the mouth. It's very energetic and it's imaginative, but there's ways that you can move the energy up and out as opposed to down and out.
Mm. And Mantak Chia does amazing work in all of this area as well, doesn't he? So that's a whole new conversation that we might have another day. But I know that he has incredible lectures on it. You can find them all over YouTube for anybody who's interested.
Yeah.
So one thing that you mentioned before that I thought was really interesting as well, which I don't know whether people know, is the inability to create muscle mass. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So when a man goes on a binge, there's so much testosterone leaving that usually what ends up happening is that when they come off of that binge, let's say they masturbate 3 or 4 times in one day, or maybe 8 times in 2 days, or something crazy like that, there's such a depletion of testosterone and dopamine. It gets so out of whack that we get into these very depressed states, and they end up creating a lot more anxiety and a lot more mania inside. And during those times, we are really unable to do the normal things that we would do. We don't want to work out, going for a run, exercising, all of those things. They are that much more difficult. And even if you can muster yourself to go and actually work out and lift, your body can't, it's just regenerating the testosterone. You're not actually able to manifest and build muscle on top of what you already have. So you just hit a plateau. And so men that, people that are boxers or fighters, or people that are in like professional sports, they often will refrain from masturbation before these big events, because obviously you want that testosterone to be in your body. So there's definitely this drain feeling that does affect your muscle mass and your drive. Like, for sure, I've experienced it. There's so many scientific studies in this book in and around it too. It's just fascinating to know how much research is being done. So yeah.
So let's talk about some figures that you've got. I know you've got some that we can really have a look at then, as to say, well, wow, okay, so this is the size of the problem, because I don't know whether people realize just how widespread this is. It's quite shocking.
Yeah, let me just share my screen here. Let's see here. There we go. So for those that are watching, this is not pornography. This is just Pornhub's Insights page. They don't have any pornography in the Insights, which is super awesome. But just since the coronavirus, well, actually since 2019, we were at 115 million people a day, and now we're up to 120 million people a day. So
120 million people a day.
Yeah, and so that was the equivalent of Canada, Australia, the Netherlands, and then another small European country, I can't remember which one, all logging on every day to watch. That's how many people are. So this is a huge thing. And what's interesting is this particular thing. Visiting Pornhub is a daily routine for more than 120 million people. And I think that copy is an interesting word choice. Obviously, they say routine because it's a PG way of, or it's a PC way of saying that these men are quite addicted, or people, because it's not just.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I believe the Pornhub stats are showing that it's now around 30% of viewership is actually women. So it's getting higher actually for women as well. And this sort of looks at the worldwide traffic changes just during COVID. So it
Wow.
jumped up 11.6, which was pretty crazy to see that. And then this one is the one that I thought was the most shocking, which was Italy. So in Italy, as soon as they issued the quarantine, the nationwide quarantine, Pornhub said, hey, we're going to offer our premium service to all Italians for free. And boom, up 57% in one day, which is
In one day.
one day from, this says right here, from March 11th to March 12th. We went from 5.3 to 57%. So, you know, this website, it just goes through, you know, this is France, it up 38%, Spain up to 61%. The US actually didn't go up nearly as far. It was only up about from 3.3 to 6.6.
So when you say 6.4 there, how many people is that, roughly?
What did they say? North America. These stats on this particular page don't say that. Let me see if I can find it here. Australia, there's Australia. From one day, it went from 0.9 up to 5.2. And then Russia, Germany. I mean, this site pretty much goes through all the different countries, so I don't want to bore anybody. But here's at the end here, it talks also about
on all of them, you can just see that on every one that you just flipped past.
Yeah,
that's extraordinary.
This kind of goes into like when they're viewing it. So you have situations where it's looking at sort of the favorite times to view. From 1 a.m. all the way to midnight, it's kind of showing the trajectory of when people are logging on, the hourly traffic worldwide. This kind of looks at all of it. And then let's see, there's also, I mean, there's just so much data here, so I don't want to go through it all. But I think that what's just, this also was very interesting. They started to look at coronavirus searches inside Pornhub, and that just skyrocketed. It was something crazy. What was that number? It was at the very, very top. I don't remember. I can't find it, but that said,
the worldwide traffic to Pornhub was up by 11.6% on March 17th. And if you're talking 120 million people, 11% is massive, right?
Oh, it's astronomical. I mean, it's millions and millions of people. It's the size of countries. So and this is just Pornhub, which is the largest one. So, I mean, I can't imagine and there's another one that's actually rivals Pornhub, but they don't, it's a one that's offshore. And so it doesn't get the insight. People don't have the insight into what their stats are because they don't publish it, but there's one that rivals Pornhub even. So it's mind-blowing for me. It really is.
You said as well that when they Pornhub gave their premium for free, and you said there was almost a meltdown on.
There was some server issues in Italy, you know, where it was basically they couldn't handle the traffic because there was just so much consumption all at once, and so they had to bring in new servers and things. So I mean, I think really the question or the topic we're talking about here is how did we get here? You know, how did the world wake up one day and go, oh shit, I have a pornography problem? The whole world. You know, I worked overseas, living in a remote village in Laos, working with children and coffee farmers, and seeing, you know, 13, 14-year-old boys out there immediately getting access to Wi-Fi or 3G on their phones and or streaming the Wi-Fi from my cafe. And that's the first introduction they have directly into it. So I think one is just access with absolutely no parental controls or governmental controls. The other way that I see this as a huge issue is that, you know, pornography as an addiction is not actually recognized in the medical community as an addiction. And the reason is that it shows up differently in the brain, a little bit differently in the brain, and in the body than substances. Substances, obviously, there's something to measure.
Tangible. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tangible, and there's withdrawals, and withdrawals can be crazy. Whereas with pornography, it's a little bit different. The way that the pornography addiction works, which, you know, there's some debate whether it's actually officially an addiction, but in my experience, yes, it was certainly an addiction. And I will say that the difference with it is it's all about novelty. So instead of wanting more and more alcohol or more cocaine or whatever the substance is, you want more and more novelty. And so you have, you know, some men will have 20 browsers open and they're just more and more, and they just are, it's insatiable for them. And so they just want the newest thing, the next thing, this. And so they go down pretty intense and crazy rabbit holes with that process. So it's all about that novelty. And I think that that's a little bit, that's why they show up differently. And then going back to the medical community, a lot of men, whether they're teenagers or adults, they go in for their physicals, their exams, and they're experiencing insomnia, they're experiencing anxiety, they're experiencing depression. And medical doctors are not asking that question. They're not saying, oh, well, do you watch pornography? And if they started there, there wouldn't be as much prescription drugs being actually prescribed. So when I look at this big picture thing, I look at sort of the way that big pharma works and the way that the sex industry works. And ultimately, they both want us to be addicted. And so in a lot of ways, I see them overlapping in their desire to control, ultimately, to control our lives and to be infused into our relationships so that there's struggle and strife and pain and suffering. Because of course, what do we do when that happens? We go back to the porn, we consume it, we spend money on it, or we go back and we get a new prescription and we fill it. So that's kind of how I see it's been played out. And the internet was really built by the pornography industry. Like in a lot of ways, most of the technological advances came because that was one way that people could make money on the internet when it was in its infancy.
That's right.
And so
I remember 20 years ago or something, somebody saying, oh, that huge house on the corner, it's a guy who runs pawn shops, you know, he's loaded, like he's got a cinema in there. Like it was kind of latest, greatest, you know, putting up porn sites on the internet was kind of, you know.
It was.
Yeah, it was a big thing. So let me ask you, so a couple of levels to this question. One, when men are watching porn, do they even know that they're addicted to it if it's not really an addiction? And do they then, it's the chicken and the egg thing, do they think they're depressed and so they're using porn? Or is it that they're using porn and don't realize they're addicted and then therefore it creates a depression? What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, my thoughts on it go back to trying to understand where it began in the infancy, in the adolescence of the boy. So most boys are exposed to pornography. Pornhub, actually, not Pornhub, a different website. It's a website that tracks young adolescents and when they start to consume, you know, pornography. And basically what I read is that right now, it's 4 out of 5 15-year-old boys are addicted, or not addicted, but are consuming pornography regularly.
4 out of 5.
Yeah, 4 out of 5. And so when I think about going back to that particular moment in my life, you know, it wasn't high-speed pornography. It was a Playboy that, you know, I mean, for me, it started with a Vanna White Playboy, right? And so the trajectory of my pornography exposure was a little bit slow in the sense of magazines. Nowadays, children, very young children, are being exposed to hardcore pornography immediately. And so the problem with that is it creates developmental issues. That can play into this question that you have, which comes first, which is, you know, is it the depression that causing it, or was the exposure to something that was not okay at a young age create a trauma in the system where the excitation in the body needs that type of arousal to feel aroused. And this is something that has been studied with men and women that have had sexual trauma, where they've had, let's say, a rape trauma, or they've had something where their body experiences so much of a rush that then when they go back into the process of being in relationships and or what they consume, they want to get back to that level of excitation, because that was where the fear and the rush of adrenaline happened in that moment. And so it all depends upon how the infancy of the sexual experience happened. And, you know, for me, my particular small town in Washington, we were the first town in the entire United States that got high-speed fiber in our entire town, underground fiber. So I didn't have that AOL dial-up, like, slow loading stuff. I went from, you know, a Playboy magazine to basically Napster and downloading, you know, pornography like very quick. And so that was a shock to my system at a very young age. I shouldn't have been exposed to that. I would never want, you know, my future child to be exposed to something of that nature. And that creates an orientation around that. And you go down these rabbit holes and see these things that are extreme, and then you end up chasing those types of environments and those types of sexual experiences that elicit that same level of hyper arousal in your system.
Yeah.
That was a lot of information.
Sorry?
I said that was a lot of information to digest.
Yeah, it's amazing though, isn't it? I just find this so interesting. So I mean, that begs to ask the question, what should we be doing for teenage boys? What, you know, if that's really kind of that breeding ground where the neural pathways start to be altered through the exposure, how can we deal with this? How can we kind of get in there and say, you know, this is this, and if there's 4 out of 5 teenagers doing it, we obviously need to do something, right?
Yeah, so I am certainly a part of that wave. I mean, I'm certainly going to be working with adolescent and teenage boys. I want to create a course in and around this type of material, because I've seen in Reddit forums very young boys that are coming in there with the same level of addiction as you know, as adults. And so it's important that somebody steps up and says, hey, here's a resource for this particular group of men, because it's not being served. No, they don't have access to anything right now, and there's nothing on the web that serves them. So that's something that I'm personally going to do. But then in addition to that, I would say, as far as if you're out there and you have a parent and you have an adolescent, I mean, ultimately, you know, the sex talk isn't the birds and the bees. The sex talk begins at a young age, and it needs to be gradual over time. And I think it's one of those things where that's a dicey topic for dads to talk to sons, or moms to talk to daughters, or cross, you know, mother to son, vice versa, daughter or father to daughter. But what I can say about that is it's really, really important that the child feels safe enough to bring their questions around sexuality to an adult, where the adult has a relationship with their child where they're not going to punish them for that curiosity and not be punitive, because that's just going to cause the child to go away. And I think that it's important to have that safe container with your child so that they feel safe and comfortable to come to you, so that those dialogues can happen. Because in my mind, if you're the mom or the dad on the block that's willing to have those conversations with their son or their daughter, they're going to tell their friends, and likely other friends and daughters or other, you know, kids around the neighborhood will show up and also want to have questions and dialogue. And I think that that's being responsible, as much as that might make the other parents a little bit uncomfortable. I think that that's an important thing to both be with the children, but then also to have those conversations with them, like with your children's friends' parents, to say, hey, can we talk a little bit about this? Because if I talk to my child about, you know, this on his or her cell phone, but then they're out hanging out with your kids, and then I find out that your kids don't have blockers, and then they haven't had that conversation, then there's likelihood that they're going to be exposed. So we all need to come together as a community to really address this at a very holistic level.
Yeah, so it's just kind of opening up, not making it a taboo subject, just kind of from them being little, speak into it like you would anything else, at the level of whatever age they're at, of course. But I think it is that kind of old school way of like never talking about anything, and all of a sudden sitting down and going, okay, son, and having this kind of weird, uncomfortable conversation where the son's just dying, wanting to just run for the hills because it's never been discussed before. And there's this kind of like, oh my God. And so they're not even listening anyway, let alone then being spoken to about, pornography, where there would be that embarrassment. I don't know whether that's a question. Is there shame in teenage boys, or is there more an embarrassment around the fact of being busted watching pornography?
Yeah, so it depends. It depends upon how you define shame. For me, shame, I mean, I like what Brene Brown says, it's a sense of worthiness, sense of really owning who you are. And so if there's a lack of self-worth and a lack of self-love, because that hasn't been mirrored in the family system, then certainly there can be shame, where the child or the adolescent is escaping through the pornography to feel some degree of connection. And so that can happen, but also they may have very loving and kind parents, and still go to it for other various reasons.
Yeah.
And I would say that can be, just, I'm trying to think of the types of situations. I mean, curiosity, around sexual orientation can lead a child to that place, which may not be around shame. Just also stumbling upon it accidentally, and then all of a sudden that kind of addictive part of the person all of a sudden begins to consume it. So it doesn't always have to show up as shame, but what I can say is that when shame is present, then what ends up happening is that they watch the porn, and then that confirms their unworthiness, and then that takes it into a darker place. And so it's about unraveling that shame and bringing them out of that shame cycle. And that can be, for each individual, it's its own nuanced journey. And so for me, when I work with a client, it's about going inward, closing the eyes. I end up leading them back into those origin stories, especially in and around the moments that their sexuality came into play, whether that was a trauma or abuse, or whether that was when they first found masturbation and ejaculation, and then helping them to see what was actually happening in and around their life during that time. Was there a ton of pressure in school? Was there a breakup with a girlfriend? Was there some trauma and abuse with mom or dad? Was there a divorce? And if the individual can connect the dots, that the reason why they went to the masturbation at that young age was in connection to not dealing with the actual external circumstances that they were really facing, then that can really help them to unpack that and really start to say, okay, that's not something that I want to continue doing, going back to using myself for this. And I want to say one last thing before I end this, because I think it's an important thing. As it relates to women on the receiving end of a man who's addicted to pornography or is addicted to masturbation, if a man's using his penis as a means to an end, or he's using that as his emotional release valve, then my experience has been, through my own self-inquiry about how I was showing up as a sexual partner to my partners, is that I wasn't able to see that they became an extension of my own masturbatory using of myself. And so I wasn't relating to them from a place of, oh, this is a human being with their own entirety of their own, sexual experience. And I was only relating to it from my place, which is that they were there for the exchange for ultimately for me to climax. And of course, yes, I was wanting for them to, to climax as well, but that was from a much more performance-based experience of like egoic nature, not from a place of like wanting to meet my partner and be like, you're you, I'm me, we meet, we're not codependent enmeshed beings just getting each other off, but we're interdependent beings that are here to show up and actually have this lovely conversation. So I think the reason why that's important is that when you peel back the layers of a man, masturbating or using porn too much, when he stops using himself, then he's free to not do that with his partner. And then his partner goes, whoa, what the hell just happened to you? Like, you can see me now. Oh my God, now I feel like I'm not just a receptacle to your sperm, or that like right in the middle of orgasm, you're just gonna leave your body and I'm just gonna be laying here alone and this is all about you. And then a lot of women report that, and that's, that sends a lot of men in this direction as well, as they're like, why does my partner always saying to me that they lose me at the last second? Where is it that I go? And it's that training, that muscle memory of just being in that sort of masturbatory mindset for decades and decades. So
it's amazing what you're saying. In my mind, I've got so many questions that I'd like to ask you, and I know we're coming towards a close, but I just find this an important conversation and extraordinarily informative, Tyson. I'm just, your knowledge is wonderful, and I think what you're doing is so incredibly important. I think the thing that I'd like to touch on before we do have to go is when you were talking just before, the sexual ego, the man ego around sexuality. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, ultimately, it's a self-objectification, and then the individual doesn't understand the co-regulation of the unit that is there, the partnership. And so if we're objectifying self, then that pornographic mindset, which is a pornographic style of relating, gets projected unconsciously onto their partner. And so they can't see themselves doing that because they can't see that they've objectified themselves, because their only erotic zone on their body is their penis, and that's it. And so they're so disconnected from feeling that they don't know how to do anything other than the performance of it instead of the actual enjoyment and the experience. Yeah. And I think that, what that, or where that leads me, just in kind of final closing, is there are people that are now teaching a way of sex, which is called karetsa, which is basically non-ejaculation sex or no orgasm sex, where both partners are coming in a very gentle way for pair bonding, and where the sexual experience can last hours at a time. And so as I have, basically stopped masturbating, stopped all pornography for 3 years, that creates a situation where you're not also seeking that inside of your sexual experience either. And then the connection and the deepness and that spiritual zone of love and feeling one is mind-blowing. It's out of this world. It's a whole other dimension of intimacy. And so I think that there's just so many benefits to at least,
you're removing the performance, aren't you? And I suppose that the part that buys into that masculine ego, sexuality ego, is that whole locker room talk and the whole kind of like, like that real, and that's a lot that we're trying to fight that at the moment. And I think both men and women are coming to a point where they're like, I just don't want to do that, and it doesn't make me comfortable, but I join in anyway because it's the male bonding, the sexual ego. So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, so I'm glad that you clarified. I think that really has to do with the competitive spirit in a man. I actually went to school at a big university, and I was in a fraternity. And so I went from 17 into a fraternity where there's hundreds and hundreds of porn videos in a library on the server where, you know, all 100 men living in this one house are watching this shit. And so, and every fraternity in my entire university had their own porn library, right? So if you think about just that, and then you get a bunch of, you know, men that just came out of high school where they're in competitive sports, playing basketball and baseball and football and whatever. Then you bring them into an education experience where they're competing with grades because the grades are posted and house positions, and they're playing intramural sports together. Then they're highly sexualized, and then they're throwing parties, drinking a bunch of booze, and then there's all kinds of women. It just creates crazy dynamics of ego dominated competition for who's the best pickup artist, who's, you know, who can do this, who can do that, who can get this girl and that girl. And it just becomes this bravado, egoic sort of behavior that just permeates through when men are leaving the nest and going out into the world and into the university where they're not around their moms and dads. And it's just,
it becomes like a culture, really, doesn't it? And then that buys into all of a number of other of things that we're dealing with. And I really think things like what you're doing and talking about, you know, providing some kind of education for adolescent boys as well, and you know, these things together, we are really making a difference on how this looks moving forward. But you know, I mean, I honest to goodness could talk to you for another 2 hours. You know, I'm going, oh, and I'd love to ask you all these questions, you know. So I know that we'll be able to continue this conversation on, and of course we'll be having question and answer in the summit, and I know that you'll not be able to be on that on the panel after this conversation, but certainly I'll be directing anybody who wants to chat with you, or we can maybe set up some kind of link where we can continue this conversation, because I think it is something that really does need to be spoken about. And I've just got so much appreciation for your courage and your bravery as well to come forward with your own story, you know, with such strength and absolute knowledge about what you're talking about. And so I'm sure we'll have more conversations about this and build in other aspects and really knuckle down into some of these things. But I can't thank you enough for sharing all of this with me. On closing, is there anything that you think, well, if I was to leave you with anything, this would be it?
I think what I'm realizing is that if you want to outgrow porn, the one missing ingredient that you need to cultivate as a man or as a woman is active and deep imagination. My experience is that when you're in imagination and you're in creativity, that cannot coexist with anxiety and fear and compulsive behavior. And so, you know, you want to quit a thing, and so you're just so focused on the thing. And the way to do that is really to cultivate something where you're able to be in an imaginal space, whether that's paying attention to dream work, whether that's, you know, picking up a hobby, painting, being creative. That is the easiest and fastest way to have something to do when that urge comes up.
So you're really supplying yourself with another strategy to deal with difficult feelings.
Yes.
And kind of channeling it through a creative outlet that would replace then, in a healthy way, the thing that you've become focused on. Oh, such interesting stuff, Tyson. I'm so grateful. Now, everybody, if you want to get in touch with Tyson, go to his speaker page on the summit document, and all of Tyson's details are there. Tyson, again, what an amazing chat that was. Thank you very much. And thank you so much for being part of this summit.
Thank you, Helen.
Cheers. And so next we'll move on to chatting to Henry, who's from the UK. Henry's going to talk to us more about alcohol addiction and his story about alcohol and how he became 11 years alcohol free. So we look forward to that chat next. So thank you very much.